The sound of glass shattering froze the entire lab. A chair scraped violently across the floor, and a student's hand tightened around his teacher's throat. No one moved. No one breathed. But what the bully didn't know was this quiet woman had once survived wars, and she had already learned how to end battles without destroying souls. The chemistry lab had always been a place of quiet curiosity, where bubbling liquids and scribbled equations felt safer than the outside world. Ms. Carter stood at the front, her calm voice guiding students through the day's experiment. She carried herself with quiet dignity, her posture straight, her eyes observant yet kind. For most students, she was simply a patient teacher who believed every mind could grow. But beneath that gentle demeanor lived years of discipline, sacrifice, and memories she rarely spoke about. At the back of the room, Tyler sat slouched in his chair, his gaze filled with resentment. He had been disruptive for weeks, muttering comments under his breath, his anger fueled by ignorance he had never been challenged to confront. Ms. Carter never responded with hostility. Instead, she answered him with steady patience, hoping kindness might soften whatever pain hid beneath his cruelty. Yet tension lingered like a storm waiting to break. Some students sensed it, exchanging nervous glances whenever Tyler's voice grew louder. Ms. Carter noticed too, but she chose calm over confrontation. She believed that every child, even the most troubled one, carried the possibility of change. What she didn't know was how quickly that fragile hope would be tested, and how deeply the moment would reveal the true strength she had spent years trying to bury. Tyler's frustration had not been born in the classroom. It had grown slowly, fed by careless jokes, online echo chambers, and years of misplaced anger he never learned to name. He mistook intimidation for power, believing fear gave him control over a world that often made him feel small. When Ms. Carter corrected his behavior calmly, it unsettled him. Her composure felt like a mirror reflecting his own chaos. That morning, a minor mistake during the lab experiment triggered his temper. A beaker slipped, liquid spilled, and laughter echoed from nearby students. Tyler's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and his eyes darted toward Ms. Carter. She approached gently, offering guidance instead of blame. "It's okay," she said softly. "Mistakes are part of learning." But to Tyler, her kindness felt like pity, and pity ignited his pride. Words laced with prejudice slipped from his mouth before he could stop them. The room fell silent. Ms. Carter paused, absorbing the insult without reacting, her face composed but her eyes heavy with quiet hurt. She had faced worse in her life, battlefields, losses, moments where survival depended on emotional control. Still, hearing such words from a child pierced deeper than any battlefield memory. The class shifted uneasily, sensing something fragile had cracked. Tyler's anger surged, and with it came a reckless decision that would change everything within seconds. The chair screeched loudly as Tyler stood, his anger now louder than reason. "You think you're better than me," he shouted, his voice shaking more with insecurity than hatred. Students froze, their hands mid-air, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Ms. Carter raised her palm slightly, a gesture of calm she had practiced countless times in far more dangerous situations. "Tyler, breathe," she said gently. "You're not my enemy." But he stepped forward, his vision blurred by emotion he could not control. In one sudden motion, he grabbed her collar, his grip tightening around her throat. Gasps filled the room. Some students reached for their phones, others covered their mouths, terrified of what might happen next. Yet Ms. Carter did not panic. Her body reacted with trained precision, but her mind chose restraint. She remembered the discipline drilled into her during years of military service. Control the situation, protect everyone, and never let anger dictate action. She could have easily subdued him in seconds. Instead, she held still, meeting his eyes with unwavering calm. In that silence, Tyler hesitated. He expected fear, resistance, or rage, but found only steadiness. And that steadiness unsettled him more than any confrontation could have. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. Ms. Carter felt the pressure of his hand, yet her breathing remained steady. Inside, memories flickered, training grounds, long nights of endurance, the faces of soldiers she had protected and lost. She had promised herself that when she left that life behind, she would use her strength only to protect, never to harm Tyler, she whispered, her voice strained but calm. You're hurting. But this isn't who you truly are. Her words were not accusations. They were invitations. Invitations to step back from the edge of a choice that could scar him forever. Tyler's grip trembled slightly. He had expected a fight, not compassion. The students watched, confused by the strange quietness in her voice. There was no fear there, only concern, almost maternal, as if she saw not a threat but a wounded child standing before her. Her composure began to chip away at his anger. His mind, clouded moments ago, now flickered with doubt. Why wasn't she fighting back? Why wasn't she yelling or calling him names? That confusion opened a small crack in the wall he had built around himself for years. Slowly, Ms. Carter lifted her hand, not to strike, but to gently loosen his grip. Her movement was precise yet soft, guided by years of discipline and an even deeper commitment to compassion. Tyler's fingers released her collar almost unconsciously, as though her calm had drained the aggression from his body. The room exhaled collectively, tension dissolving into stunned silence. She stepped back, not to distance herself from him emotionally, but to give him space to regain control. Her throat ached, yet her voice remained steady. You're not my enemy, Tyler, she repeated. But you are at war with something inside you. Those words lingered in the air, heavier than any punishment. Tyler's anger faded into confusion, then into shame he couldn't hide. No one had ever spoken to him that way, not with authority wrapped in kindness. He realized she had chosen not to humiliate him, not to overpower him, but to understand him. In that moment, the entire class witnessed a different kind of strength, not one that crushed, but one that restrained, protected, and left room for change. The silence that followed felt heavier than the outburst itself. Tyler's hands trembled as he stepped back, suddenly aware of the dozens of eyes fixed on him. Shame crept in slowly, replacing the heat of anger with a cold realization of what he had just done. Ms. Carter adjusted her collar, her composure unbroken, though a faint redness marked her throat. She didn't shout, didn't call security, didn't even raise her voice. Instead, she simply looked at him with quiet understanding that made his chest tighten. Sit down, Tyler, she said softly, not as a command but as an invitation to regain control. He obeyed without protest, confusion swirling in his mind. Why hadn't she fought back? Why hadn't she exposed him in front of everyone? Her restraint unsettled him more than punishment ever could. Around the room, students exchanged glances, witnessing a moment that felt far bigger than a classroom incident. Ms. Carter resumed the lesson, her voice steady though slightly hoarse. The experiment continued, but no one truly focused on the beakers anymore. Instead, they focused on her quiet strength, an unspoken lesson about dignity, self-control, and the courage to respond to hate with calm. As the class ended, students left quietly, their usual chatter replaced with thoughtful silence. Tyler lingered near his desk, unsure whether to leave or apologize. His pride battled with guilt, both fighting for dominance. Ms. Carter packed away lab equipment slowly, giving him time without forcing confrontation. She understood that growth rarely happened under pressure. It needed space, reflection, and the courage to face one's own mistakes. Finally, Tyler spoke, his voice barely audible. Why didn't you fight back? She paused, then met his eyes. Because winning a fight isn't always the same as winning a life, she replied gently. I've seen what violence does, even when you're justified. It leaves marks you can't erase. Her words carried the weight of experiences far beyond the classroom. Tyler sensed that she had lived through things he could not imagine. For the first time, he felt curious instead of defensive. The anger that once fueled him now felt misplaced, almost childish. He wanted to say sorry, but the words stuck in his throat. Shame often made honesty difficult. Ms. Carter noticed and gave him a small nod, silently telling him that change didn't have to be perfect to be real. That evening, Ms. Carter sat alone in her small apartment, the quiet hum of the city outside her window. She touched her throat lightly, not in pain but in reflection. Memories surfaced, training drills, missions where split-second decisions meant survival, and moments when she had learned to neutralize threats without hatred. Leaving the military had not erased those instincts, it had simply redirected them. Teaching, for her, was another form of service. Instead of protecting lives on a battlefield, she now protected fragile futures in a classroom. Tyler's outburst hadn't frightened her. What frightened her was the pain she saw behind his aggression. She recognized that look. Many soldiers had carried it, anger masking fear, prejudice hiding insecurity, cruelty born from feeling powerless. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer, not for herself, but for the boy who had nearly crossed a line he could never fully return from. She hoped he would learn before life punished him in harsher ways. Compassion, she believed, was not weakness. It was discipline. It was choosing patience when force would be easier. The next day, Tyler arrived early, his usual swagger replaced by hesitation. He found Ms. Carter arranging notebooks on her desk. The room felt different, less like a battlefield, more like a place of second chances. He stood there awkwardly, unsure how to begin. I messed up yesterday, he finally muttered, staring at the floor. Ms. Carter looked at him calmly. Yes, you did, she said, her honesty gentle but firm. But mistakes don't define you. What you do after them does. Her response surprised him. She wasn't dismissing his actions, yet she wasn't condemning him either. It was a balance he had never experienced before. Tyler swallowed hard, feeling a strange heaviness lift slightly from his chest. I don't even know why I got so mad, he admitted. Sometimes anger is just pain looking for a voice, she replied. The real strength is learning to listen to that pain instead of letting it control you. For the first time, Tyler considered that his behavior wasn't power, it was a reaction. And reactions, unlike identity, could change. Weeks passed, and the classroom slowly transformed into a place of quiet healing. Tyler still struggled, but his outbursts softened, replaced by questions and moments of reflection. Ms. Carter guided him patiently, never ignoring his mistakes but never humiliating him either. She understood that discipline without compassion created resentment, while compassion without accountability created weakness. Balance was the lesson she hoped every student would carry beyond school walls. One afternoon, Tyler stayed after class again, helping clean the lab tables. You were in the military, weren't you? He asked hesitantly. She nodded. Yes. But the real battles I remember aren't the ones with weapons. They're the ones where we had to choose humanity over hatred. He absorbed her words quietly. The image he once had of strength, loud, aggressive, intimidating, now felt incomplete. Real strength, he realized, looked like patience under pressure, like restraint when retaliation was easy. In that quiet classroom, a deeper lesson unfolded, that true power wasn't about dominating others, but about mastering oneself, and using that mastery to protect, guide, and heal. The transformation in Tyler did not happen overnight. Some days he still arrived with frustration clouding his face, but now he paused before reacting, as if remembering the moment his anger had almost defined him forever. Ms. Carter noticed these small hesitations and treated them as victories. She understood that growth was rarely dramatic. It often appeared as tiny choices made differently each day. One afternoon, during a group activity, another student accidentally knocked over Tyler's notebook. The room tensed, expecting an outburst. Instead, he inhaled deeply, picked up the notebook, and muttered, "It's fine." The class exhaled in relief. Ms. Carter caught his eye and offered a subtle nod of pride. That silent acknowledgement meant more to him than applause ever could. Inside, Tyler felt conflicted. Letting go of anger felt unfamiliar, almost like losing a shield he had relied on for years. But at the same time, he felt lighter, less exhausted by constant hostility. He began to realize that strength wasn't loud, it was controlled, deliberate, and rooted in self-respect rather than fear. One day, Ms. Carter assigned an essay titled "The Strongest Person I Know." Students groaned playfully, but Tyler froze. His mind immediately replayed the moment in the lab, the calm eyes, the steady voice, the choice not to retaliate. He had spent years admiring aggressive figures who dominated through intimidation, yet none of them had shown the quiet courage she displayed that day. He struggled to write at first, his pen hovering above the paper. Finally, he began slowly, describing a teacher who faced hatred with patience and responded to violence with restraint. As the words flowed, he felt something shift inside him, a recognition that real courage often appeared gentle on the surface but carried immense discipline beneath. When Ms. Carter later read the essays, she paused at his, her eyes softening as she understood what he was trying to say without naming her directly. She didn't praise him publicly, knowing humility was part of the lesson. Instead, she simply wrote a note: "Growth begins when we choose reflection over reaction." Those words stayed with Tyler long after the bell rang. Outside the classroom, life continued to test Tyler's progress. Old friends mocked his calmer attitude, calling him weak for not reacting aggressively anymore. Their words stung, stirring the familiar urge to prove himself. But now, another voice existed inside him, quieter, steadier, echoing Ms. Carter's lessons about self-control and dignity. One afternoon, when a classmate made a careless remark filled with prejudice, Tyler felt anger surge again. His fists clenched, but he stopped. Instead of lashing out, he said firmly, "That's not okay." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried conviction. The room fell silent. For the first time, he used strength not to intimidate, but to defend respect. Later, he realized how different that felt. There was no guilt, no shame, only a quiet sense of integrity. He understood then that the strongest battles weren't fought against others, but within oneself. Every moment of restraint was a victory over the impulsive version of himself he no longer wanted to be. Growth, he realized, was not about erasing the past but choosing a better response in the present. Meanwhile, Ms. Carter continued teaching with the same calm grace, never drawing attention to the incident that had changed everything. She believed redemption should feel natural, not forced. However, she remained observant, guiding Tyler subtly whenever she sensed he struggled. She didn't see him as the boy who grabbed her throat. She saw him as a young mind learning to redirect pain into purpose. One day, she shared a story with the class, not about war, but about forgiveness. She spoke about how holding on to anger could feel powerful but ultimately trapped a person in endless battles. True strength, she said softly, is choosing who you become after someone hurts you, or after you hurt someone else. Tyler felt those words deeply. He realized she was not just teaching science, she was teaching life, resilience, and the courage to change. Her story wasn't about defeating enemies but about ending cycles of harm before they consumed another generation. In that moment, he understood that her military past hadn't made her dangerous. It had made her disciplined enough to choose compassion over retaliation. As the semester neared its end, the classroom atmosphere felt warmer, more connected. Students who once avoided Tyler now spoke to him normally, sensing the sincerity in his changed behavior. Trust, once broken, was slowly rebuilding, not through grand gestures, but through consistent small acts of respect. On the final week, Tyler stayed behind again, watching Ms. Carter erase the board. "You could have reported me that day," he said quietly. "You could have ruined everything for me." She turned, her expression calm but thoughtful. "Consequences matter," she replied. "But so does understanding why something happened. I didn't want to end your future when I believed you were still capable of changing it." Her words hit him harder than any punishment could have. For the first time, he truly grasped the weight of the second chance he had been given. It wasn't leniency, it was trust. And trust carried responsibility. Standing there, he felt a deep respect for her, not just as a teacher, but as a mentor who had chosen healing over humiliation and transformation over revenge. Graduation week approached, and the school buzzed with anticipation, yet Tyler felt unusually reflective. The halls that once echoed with his anger now carried memories of quiet lessons and second chances. He often found himself pausing outside the lab, remembering the moment that had almost defined him forever. Instead of shame alone, he now felt gratitude that someone had seen beyond his worst action and believed he could be better. During the final lab session, Ms. Carter assigned a simple experiment about balance and reaction. Every action, she explained, has an equal and opposite reaction. But in life, we have the power to choose a different response. Her words were clearly about more than chemistry. Tyler understood immediately. She was reminding them that human beings were not bound by instinct. They could interrupt cycles of harm through conscious choices. As he carefully completed the experiment, he realized that his life, too, was about balance now. Balancing anger with patience, pride with humility, and past mistakes with future responsibility. The lab no longer felt like the place where he lost control. It had become the place where he learned to regain it. After class, Tyler gathered his courage and approached Ms. Carter once more. The sunlight through the windows softened the room, making the moment feel almost symbolic. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about everything. About how close I came to ruining my life and hurting you." She listened without interrupting, her expression calm but attentive. "I used to think strength meant never backing down," he continued. "But you showed me it means knowing when to stop, when to breathe, when to choose differently." Ms. Carter nodded gently. "Strength is not the absence of anger," she said. "It's the ability to guide it instead of letting it guide you." Her words settled deeply within him. For years, he had believed the world was divided into winners and losers, the powerful and the weak. Now he understood that real power was internal: discipline, empathy, and the courage to grow beyond one's worst moment. That realization didn't erase his past, but it transformed how he carried it. The day of the school assembly arrived, where students shared reflections about their journey through the year. Tyler had never volunteered for such things before, but something inside him urged him forward. When his name was called, murmurs filled the hall, many remembering the boy he used to be. He took a deep breath and spoke honestly. He talked about anger, about feeling misunderstood, and about how one moment of losing control had nearly shaped his entire future. Then he spoke about a teacher who responded not with fear or punishment alone, but with calm strength and belief in change. "I learned that day," he said, his voice steady, "that the strongest people aren't the ones who overpower others. They're the ones who help others become better." The hall fell silent, not out of tension, but respect. Ms. Carter listened quietly from the side, her eyes reflecting quiet pride, not because she was praised, but because she saw genuine growth. Tyler's words were not rehearsed. They were earned through reflection, humility, and the difficult process of becoming someone new. After the assembly, many students approached Tyler with smiles and supportive words. He felt awkward but grateful, realizing that respect built through change felt far more meaningful than fear ever had. The weight he once carried, the need to prove himself through aggression, had slowly lifted, replaced by a quieter confidence rooted in self-awareness. Later, he found Ms. Carter standing near the lab door. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he simply said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." She smiled softly. "People are more than their worst mistakes," she replied. "Sometimes they just need someone to remind them of that." Her response was simple, yet it carried profound truth. Tyler understood that her restraint that day wasn't weakness, it was wisdom shaped by experience and compassion. She had ended a cycle of anger not by defeating him, but by guiding him toward self-reflection. That lesson would follow him far beyond school walls, shaping how he treated others, how he faced conflict, and how he defined strength for the rest of his life. On the last day of school, Tyler stood at the lab doorway one final time, absorbing the quiet room that had witnessed both his lowest and highest moments. Sunlight reflected off the glass beakers, casting gentle patterns across the desks. It felt symbolic, fragile objects capable of breaking, yet also capable of holding powerful reactions safely when handled with care. He realized people were much the same. Mishandled emotions could shatter relationships and futures, but guided with patience and understanding, they could transform into growth. Ms. Carter joined him, and they shared a quiet smile, no words needed. As he walked away, he no longer carried the identity of a bully defined by anger. Instead, he carried the lesson of restraint, empathy, and second chances. The incident that once threatened to end his future had instead reshaped it, teaching him that true victory was not about overpowering someone, but about mastering the self and choosing compassion when anger felt easier. Strength is not proven by force, but by the courage to choose compassion over anger. Sometimes, the greatest battles are the ones we win within ourselves. If this story touched your heart, like, subscribe, and join our Heart Angels family.